My life operated on a system of carefully curated beige. My apartment walls were a color called agreeable gray, which felt less like a design choice and more like a diagnosis. My car was a sensible sedan that excelled at not being noticed. Even my job, as an operations supervisor at a logistics firm that prided itself on seamless integration, was a monument to the unremarkable. I was Alex, 34 years old, and my primary emotional state was a low-grade hum of resignation. It was quiet. It was stable. It was the life I had built after the demolition of the last one. Sarah, my ex-fiancée, had been the architect of that demolition. The breakup hadn't been a fiery explosion. It was more like a controlled implosion, quiet and devastatingly efficient. We'd been together for 6 years, a comfortable journey down a well-paved road. Then one day, she sat me down on our mutually agreed-upon charcoal sofa and delivered the verdict. "You're just comfortable, Alex," she had said, the word landing like a feather that somehow shattered bone. "You're safe. You're predictable. I think I need more." It turned out, was a scuba instructor named Kai she'd met on a work trip. He had a tribal tattoo and an aversion to schedules. He was, in every conceivable way, not me. Her parting words had become the branding iron on my soul. "You're a wonderful man, Alex. You're just not a grand adventure." So I embraced the quiet. I mistook my fear of being hurt again for wisdom. I built walls of routine and called it a fortress of self-sufficiency. I convinced myself that being safe wasn't an insult, but a virtue. My heart was a well-managed ledger, balanced and closed for auditing. And then Maya crashed into my carefully beige world. She wasn't a crash in the literal sense. Maya Reyes was my work rival, my professional nemesis, the thorn in the side of my quarterly reports. Where I was deliberate, she was decisive. Where I built consensus, she forged ahead with the sheer force of her will. We were the two frontrunners for the new director of regional operations position, and the competition was a silent, simmering war fought in spreadsheets and conference rooms. She was sharp, dressed in tailored blazers that were somehow both armor and a statement. Her dark hair pulled back in a severe knot that brooked no argument. In meetings, her gaze could dissect a flawed proposal from 20 feet away. She was, in a word, formidable. She was the opposite of beige. The inciting incident was, as most things are, an act of God disguised as a municipal failure. A summer thunderstorm of biblical proportions had descended upon the city, a furious tantrum of lightning and wind that knocked out power to half the downtown core. Our office building had shut down, sending everyone scrambling. The final proposal for the massive Carmichael Logistics contract was due at 8 in the morning. It was the project that would likely decide the promotion. Both Maya and I had been burning the midnight oil, and now we were adrift. My apartment building, a newer construction on the edge of the blackout zone, had a powerful backup generator. It was my one small point of pride, a testament to my love of contingency planning. My lights were on. My internet was blazing. My world was, as always, operational. I was heading out of the darkened office lobby when I saw her, a solitary figure silhouetted against the deluge. She was standing under the useless awning, staring at her dead phone, the rain painting dark streaks on the shoulders of her silk blouse. For a moment, she didn't look like a rival. She looked stranded. The part of me that was Sarah-proofed and self-sufficient told me to walk on by. Helping her was a strategic disadvantage. The part of me that was just me, the part that still remembered basic human decency, stopped. "Power out at your place too?" I asked, my voice sounding unnaturally loud over the roar of the storm. She looked up, startled. The usual sharpness in her eyes was replaced by a flicker of raw frustration. "Of course it is. The entire grid in my district is fried. I've got 3% battery and a 70-page proposal that exists only on a cloud I can't access." She ran a hand through her hair, dislodging the perfect knot. It was the first time I'd ever seen her look anything less than perfectly composed. A stupid, insane thought popped into my head. My building has a generator. She stared at me, her expression unreadable. The rain dripped from the tip of her nose. I could see the gears turning in her head, weighing the pros and cons, the professional optics versus the crushing reality of the deadline. It was the exact same calculation I was making. Are you offering me sanctuary, Alex? The corner of her mouth quirked up, the familiar wit returning. I'm offering you Wi-Fi and a power outlet. I clarified, my voice flat. It's a matter of practicality. The Carmichael proposal is too important for the company to have it derailed by a thunderstorm. It was a good, logical, business-first excuse. It was also a complete lie. I just didn't want to see her look so defeated. She held my gaze for a long moment, then gave a single, decisive nod. Fine. But I'm buying the pizza. And that's how Maya Reyes ended up in my apartment, a splash of vibrant, chaotic color in the middle of my agreeable gray. She kicked off her heels by the door, the sound of sharp report in the quiet of my home. She surveyed the space with a quick, analytical glance, the same one she used to evaluate boardroom presentations. I saw my life through her eyes, the neat stack of magazines on the coffee table, the obsessively aligned remote controls, the single, uninspired landscape painting above the sofa. It was the visual equivalent of a dial tone. Minimalist, she commented, though it sounded more like a clinical observation. It's functional, I said, feeling an absurd need to defend my lack of personality. She just hummed in response, already pulling her laptop from her bag. There was a focus to her that was almost unnerving. She wasn't a guest. She was a soldier setting up a command post in neutral territory. I watched her for a moment. In the office, under the harsh fluorescent lights, her intensity was intimidating. Here, in the warm, soft glow of my living room lamp, it was something else. It was captivating. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, her lower lip caught between her teeth. A stray strand of dark hair had escaped its confinement and curled softly against her cheek. I had a sudden, inexplicable urge to reach out and tuck it behind her ear. I shoved my hands in my pockets instead. We set up shop at my dining table, our laptops humming in a strange harmony. For the first hour, the only sounds were the furious clicking of keys and the relentless drumming of the rain against the window. It was a truce born of necessity. We were no longer rivals, but collaborators against a common enemy, the clock. You missed a key data point in the third quarter freight analysis, she said without looking up from her screen. It skews the cost-benefit projection. I didn't miss it, I countered, scrolling through my own document. I omitted it. It's an outlier based on the port strike. Including it would be misleading. She finally turned to look at me, one eyebrow arched. Misleading? Or just less favorable to your efficiency model? Accurate, I said, my voice firm. My model is about sustainable, long-term efficiency, not flashy, short-term gains. It was the same argument we'd had a dozen times in meetings, but here, in the quiet of my apartment, it felt different. Less like a battle and more like a debate between two people who genuinely cared about the outcome. Flashy gets the client's attention, she retorted, but there was no heat in it. A small smile played on her lips. But accurate keeps them. She turned back to her screen. Fine. I'll add a footnote explaining the omission. A compromise. A compromise, I agreed, feeling a strange sense of victory that had nothing to do with the proposal. An hour later, the pizza arrived. We ate it straight from the box, sitting on the floor of my living room, the formality of the dining table abandoned. The professional armor was beginning to crack. She had taken off her blazer, revealing a simple silk shell underneath. She'd pulled her hair free from its knot, and it fell in soft waves around her shoulders. She looked younger, less like a corporate warrior. So, she said, chewing on a crust, this is where the magic happens. The nerve center of Alex Collier. I looked around at my beige sanctuary. It's not so much magic as it is methodical organization. I can see that, she said, her eyes twinkling. I bet your sock drawer is arranged by color and fabric weight. I felt a flush of heat creep up my neck. And seasonal appropriateness, I admitted, unable to lie. She laughed, a real, genuine laugh that echoed in the quiet room. It was a beautiful sound. It was a sound that didn't belong in my carefully curated silence. Of course it is. Why am I not surprised? What's your place like? I asked, deflecting. I'm picturing a chrome and glass palace with a stock ticker in the kitchen. She shook her head, her smile fading slightly. You'd be surprised. It's messy. Books everywhere. Half-finished paintings. My landlord despairs. She looked down at her pizza, a flicker of something I couldn't name crossing her face. It's my space. No one else's rules. There was a story there, but I didn't push. We fell back into a comfortable silence, the only sounds the rain and the quiet chewing. The storm that had thrown us together was also insulating us, creating a small pocket of existence where the rules of the outside world, of rivalry and promotions, didn't seem to apply. It was in this quiet space that the first test came. Her phone, plugged into the wall and finally charged, buzzed violently on the floor. She glanced at the screen, and her entire posture shifted. The soft lines of her face hardened, the relaxed set of her shoulders tensed. The armor was back in place. I have to take this, she said, her voice clipped. She stood and walked over to the window, turning her back to me. I couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but I could hear her. Her voice was low, controlled, each word a carefully placed stone in a defensive wall. No, Julian. I said I'm busy. It doesn't matter where I am. No, you can't just swing by. Because I said so. This isn't a negotiation. The call ended with a sharp tap on the screen. She stood with her back to me for a long moment, her forehead resting against the cool glass of the window, watching the rain. I pretended to be engrossed in a particularly fascinating piece of pepperoni. When she finally turned around, her face was a mask of cool indifference, but her eyes betrayed the turmoil. They were stormy, just like the world outside. Sorry about that, she said, her tone falsely bright. The old Alex, the safe Alex, would have nodded and said, no problem, and immediately changed the subject. But the sight of that fleeting vulnerability, the echo of that defensive tone in her voice, stirred something in me. Something protective. He sounds like a piece of work, I said quietly. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly. She had expected a platitude, a polite dismissal. I had offered an alliance. She hesitated, then gave a short, humorless laugh. That's the kindest thing anyone's ever called him. She walked back and sat on the floor, picking up a cold slice of pizza, but not eating it. Julian, he likes to be in charge. Of everything. Of everyone. I know the type, I said, thinking of Sarah's casual dismissal of my own quiet nature, her need for someone more declarative. Someone like Kai. Maya looked at me then, really looked at me. Her gaze was intense, perceptive. It felt like she was scanning my internal hard drive, looking for the corrupted files. Yes, she said slowly, her voice soft. I think you do. We worked for another few hours, the earlier camaraderie now underscored by a new, more fragile intimacy. The proposal was coming together, a seamless blend of her bold strategies and my meticulous data analysis. It was better than anything either of us could have done alone. By 2 a.m, we were done. We stared at the finished document on my laptop screen, a monument to our strange, storm-induced collaboration. Exhaustion was setting in, a heavy, bone-deep weariness that lowered all defenses. We did it, she breathed, a genuine smile of relief spreading across her face. It's actually really good. It is, I agreed. My apartment was quiet again, the rain having softened to a gentle patter. The generator hummed its steady, reassuring rhythm in the basement. Maya stretched, her arms reaching for the ceiling, a graceful, feline movement that made me forget how to breathe for a second. She yawned, a wide, uninhibited yawn that she didn't bother to cover. I'm wrecked, she confessed. I don't think I can even make it to a cab right now. The guest room is just a storage space for boxes, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. But the couch is comfortable. You can stay, just until the storm passes or the power comes back. She looked from me to the couch, a long, gray monstrosity I'd bought for its durability, not its aesthetics. She seemed to be weighing another set of options, but this time they felt far more personal. Are you sure? She asked, her voice small. It's just a couch, I said, trying to sound casual, as if I offer my mortal enemy a place to sleep all the time. and I make a surprisingly decent pot of coffee in the morning. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Okay, Alex. Okay. I got her a blanket and a pillow from my linen closet. They smelled of cedar and clean cotton, the scent of my quiet, orderly life. As I handed them to her, our fingers brushed. It was a spark, a jolt of static electricity that felt anything but accidental. Her eyes met mine, and for a split second, the air was thick with unspoken things. Then the moment passed. She took the bedding, murmured a "thank you," and turned away. I went to my room and shut the door, but I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark, listening to the faint sounds of her settling on the couch, the soft rustle of the blanket, the sigh she let out as she finally relaxed. My fortress of solitude had been breached, and the most terrifying part was I didn't want her to leave. I thought about Sarah. She had always complained that my life lacked spontaneity, that I was a creature of habit. And yet here I was, with my biggest professional rival asleep on my sofa in the middle of the night. It was the most spontaneous thing that had happened to me in years. I wondered what Sarah would think. I realized with a startling jolt that I didn't care. It was sometime in that hazy space between wakefulness and sleep that I heard it. A small, muffled sound from the living room. I sat up, my senses on high alert. It was a whimper, a sound of distress. My first thought was that she was in pain. I crept out of my room, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm against my ribs. The living room was bathed in the faint, ambient glow of the city lights that filtered through the window. Maya was curled on the couch, wrapped tightly in the blanket, her face etched with a tension that even sleep couldn't erase. She was dreaming. She shifted, murmuring something unintelligible. Her brow was furrowed, her breathing shallow. It was a stark contrast to the powerful, confident woman I knew from the office. This was someone vulnerable, someone unguarded. I stood there for a moment, feeling like an intruder. I should go back to my room, leave her to her private nightmares. But I was rooted to the spot. She whimpered again, a little louder this time. And then she spoke, her voice thick with sleep, but startlingly clear in the quiet room. "Don't send me home," she whispered. "Please, don't make me go back." The words hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't about her apartment with a faulty power grid. It was about something deeper, a plea from the unguarded depths of her subconscious. It was a plea for sanctuary. It was aimed at the phantoms in her dream, at Julian, at a past I couldn't comprehend. But in that moment, in the stillness of my living room, it felt like it was aimed at me. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just stood there and watched over her until her breathing evened out and the tension in her face finally eased. The storm outside had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean. But inside my apartment, a new storm was just beginning to brew. And I knew, with a certainty that terrified and thrilled me in equal measure, that my quiet, beige life would never be the same. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm, a rare occurrence. The silence in the apartment was different. It wasn't the empty silence I was used to. It was a silence that held the presence of another person. It was a silence that was full. I crept into the living room. Maya was still asleep on the couch, her dark hair fanned out across the pillow. The morning light was gentle on her face, erasing the last traces of her troubled dreams. She looked peaceful. She looked right. The thought was so unexpected, so foreign, that it stopped me in my tracks. It was one thing to feel a grudging respect for a rival, another to feel a spark of attraction. But this feeling, this sense of her belonging in my space, was something else entirely. It was dangerous. It was the kind of feeling that could dismantle a carefully constructed fortress brick by brick. I retreated to the kitchen and started the coffee, the familiar ritual of comfort in the face of this new, unsettling emotional landscape. I focused on the process, the grinding of the beans, the measuring of the water, the low gurgle of the machine. Methodical, predictable, safe. Smells good. Her voice, husky with sleep, made me jump. I turned to see her standing in the kitchen doorway, wrapped in the blanket, looking endearingly disheveled. "Morning," I said, my voice a little too rough. "Coffee's almost ready." She padded over to the counter and leaned against it, watching me. "You're a lifesaver, Alex. Seriously, I would have been completely sunk without you." "It was nothing," I mumbled, focusing on pouring the coffee into 2 mugs. I handed one to her, our fingers brushing again. This time, the spark was undeniable. She didn't pull away immediately. Her eyes held mine over the rim of the mug. "It wasn't nothing," she said softly. "You didn't have to do it." Before I could respond, a thought, sharp and unwelcome, cut through the moment. Sarah would have called this boring. Just 2 people drinking coffee. But Sarah wasn't here, and this didn't feel boring. It felt significant. We submitted the proposal from my laptop with 5 minutes to spare, a joint email that felt like a treaty signing. The sense of accomplishment was mutual, a shared victory that temporarily erased the line between us. As she gathered her things to leave, an awkwardness settled between us. The storm was over. The emergency had passed. We were once again Alex and Maya, rivals for the same job. The sanctuary was closing. "Well," she said, slinging her bag over her shoulder. "Thank you. For everything." "Anytime," I said, the words sounding hollow. She walked to the door, then paused, her hand on the knob. She turned back to me, a thoughtful expression on her face. "You know," she began, her voice hesitant, "everyone at work, they have this idea of you. The quiet guy, the unflappable machine who just gets things done." I braced myself for the punchline. The boring. "But you're not," she continued, her gaze direct and unwavering. "You're not unflappable. You're just deliberate. You think before you act. You watch, you listen, and then you move. It's not slowness. It's purpose." She gave a small, wry smile. Sarah was a fool not to see that. My breath hitched. She had not only referenced my deepest insecurity, she had taken it, examined it, and redefined it as a strength. She hadn't just seen my fortress, she'd seen the blueprints. She'd understood the reason it was built. In that moment, I felt more seen, more understood than I had in 6 years with the woman I was supposed to marry. It was the most devastatingly attractive thing anyone had ever done. "How did you?" I started, but I couldn't finish the sentence. "I'm a project manager, Alex," she said, her eyes twinkling. "I'm trained to see the underlying systems." She opened the door. "I'll see you at the office." And then she was gone, leaving a void in my apartment that was far bigger than the space she had occupied. The silence that returned was the old kind, the empty kind. The next few days at work were masterclass in tension. We were back to being rivals, but the game had changed. Every brief, eye contact across the conference table was loaded with the memory of pizza on the floor and coffee in the morning. Every professional disagreement was underpinned by the new, startling intimacy of her seeing right through me. I found myself watching her, not as a competitor, but as Maya. I noticed the way she tapped her pen when she was thinking, the slight frown she got when our boss, Mr. Henderson, dismissed a good idea, the way she smiled with her eyes when a junior colleague succeeded. I was a mess. My carefully managed ledger was a shambles, my beige world saturated with color. I was distracted, unfocused, and completely terrified. The complication arrived on a Thursday afternoon, in the form of a man who oozed the kind of effortless arrogance that only comes from old money and a lifetime of getting what you want. He was tall, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than my car, and had the chiseled jaw of a man who had never been told no. He strode into our open-plan office like he owned it, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Maya. "There you are," he said, his voice carrying across the entire floor. "I thought we could have lunch." Every head in the office turned. Maya froze, her fingers hovering over her keyboard. A dull flush crept up her neck. "Julian," she said, her voice tight, "this is my office. We're busy." "Nonsense," he said, waving a dismissive hand as he approached her desk. He leaned over, planting his hands on her workspace, invading her territory. "We need to talk about your little sleepover the other night." He said the word sleepover with a sneer, making it sound sordid and cheap. I felt a hot surge of anger. He was publicly shaming her, cornering her, reasserting the control she had fought against on the phone. My hands clenched into fists under my desk. The deliberate, methodical Alex was screaming. The part of me that had watched her sleep, that had heard her desperate plea not to be sent home, wanted to launch myself across the room. "There's nothing to talk about," Maya said, her voice dangerously quiet. She stood up, trying to create space between them, but he just smirked. "Don't be childish, Maya. You had your little tantrum. It's over. Come back home." He reached out to touch her arm, and that's when I moved. I didn't think. I didn't analyze. I just stood up and walked over. I placed myself between Julian and Maya, a quiet, unremarkable wall of beige. "She said she's busy," I said. My voice was level, calm, but it cut through the tension. Julian's eyes flickered to me, a flicker of annoyance that quickly morphed into condescending amusement. He looked me up and down, taking in my department store suit and my sensible shoes. He dismissed me in a single glance. "And you are?" he asked, his tone dripping with disdain. "I'm the person telling you to leave her alone," I said, holding his gaze. I wasn't shouting. I wasn't threatening. I was just stating a fact. In that moment, I understood what Maya meant. It wasn't slowness. It was purpose. My purpose was to get this man away from her. Julian laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Is this him? The office drone you spent the night with? Really, Maya? I thought you had better taste." Behind me, I felt Maya flinch. The public humiliation was his goal. He wanted to strip her of her power, to reduce her to a conquest who had strayed. "My taste is my business," Maya said, her voice regaining its strength. She stepped out from behind me, aligning herself with me, shoulder to shoulder. A united front. And my personal life is not a topic for discussion in my workplace. Or anywhere else. "We are done, Julian. Leave. Now." Her strength was breathtaking. She wasn't a damsel in distress. She was a queen defending her castle, and she had just accepted me as her ally. Julian's face tightened, his mask of charm slipping to reveal the ugliness beneath. He stared at me, then at her, the reality of his defeat dawning on him. He had lost control. "Fine," he spat, his voice low and venomous. "Have fun with your project." He shot one last, hateful glare at me, then turned on his heel and strode out of the office, leaving a wake of stunned silence. The entire office was pretending not to stare. Maya and I stood there for a beat, the air crackling between us. The stakes had been raised. Our private, storm-born connection had just been thrown into the harsh fluorescent light of our professional lives. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She wouldn't look at me. She was staring at her desk, her hands gripping the edge. "He had no right," I said, my voice equally low. Without another word, she grabbed her purse and walked toward the exit. I hesitated for a second, then followed her. I didn't know where we were going. I just knew I couldn't let her be alone. I found her on the small, concrete balcony on the 5th floor, a place people usually went for smoke breaks. She was staring out at the city, her arms wrapped around herself, as if holding herself together. The wind whipped a few strands of hair across her face. I stood beside her, not speaking, just sharing the silence. We stayed like that for a long time, the sounds of the city a dull roar below us. "I hate him," she finally said, her voice thick with emotion. "I hate that he can still do that. Walk in and make me feel small. Make me feel like I have to justify my own life." "You don't," I said. "You don't have to justify anything." She turned to look at me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Why did you do that, Alex? In there. You put yourself right in the middle of it. You didn't have to." It was the same question she'd asked about the couch, but this time the stakes were higher. This wasn't about Wi-Fi. This was about alliances, about choices. "Because," I said, the words feeling clumsy but true, "I couldn't stand there and watch him treat you like that. Because when he looked at you, he didn't see you. He saw something he thought he owned." A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. "And what do you see?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The question hung in the air between us, heavy and fragile. The safe, predictable Alex would have offered a compliment about her work ethic, her intelligence. But I was tired of being safe. I was tired of beige. I took a step closer, my heart pounding a frantic, terrifying rhythm. I see the person who can dismantle a budget proposal in 30 seconds. I see the person who bites her lip when she's concentrating. I see the person who is strong enough to stand up to a bully like him and vulnerable enough to dream about not wanting to go home. Her breath caught. I had laid all my cards on the table. I had admitted to seeing her in the office, in my home, in her sleep. I had admitted to seeing all the different complex pieces of her. "Why, Alex?" she asked, her voice a bare whisper. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I think I'm falling for you, Maya." I confessed, the words tasting of terror and relief. "Because you walked into my quiet, orderly life and you turn on all the lights. And I don't want you to leave." She stared at me, her stormy eyes searching mine, looking for the fine print, the escape clause. She found none. And then she closed the small space between us. Her hand came up to cup my jaw, her touch hesitant and electric. She rose up on her toes, and she kissed me. It wasn't a soft, tentative kiss. It was a kiss of desperation and gratitude, of shared battles and silent understanding. It was the taste of salt from her tears and the feeling of finally being home. In that moment, on a concrete balcony overlooking a city that didn't care I wasn't safe. I wasn't predictable. I was, for the first time in a very long time, on the verge of a grand adventure. And it was anything but beige. The world seemed to fall away. The distant traffic, the city hum, the professional anxieties, they all dissolved into the background noise of a life I was rapidly leaving behind. There was only the press of her lips against mine, the soft texture of her hair tangled in my fingers, the feeling of her hand anchoring me, holding me steady as the ground shifted beneath my feet. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless, the air charged with a new reality. She rested her forehead against mine, her eyes still closed. "You have spectacularly bad timing, Alex Collier," she murmured, a smile in her voice. "It's one of my core competencies," I managed to say, my own voice unsteady, right next to color-coding my sock drawer. She laughed, a watery but genuine sound. She pulled back slightly, her dark eyes searching mine. The tears were gone, replaced by a look of profound, heart-stopping clarity. "No one's ever stood up for me like that," she said, her voice low. "Not really. Julian's version of defense was buying me expensive things to make it better. He never actually stood in the fire with me." "I'm not afraid of a little fire," I said, and I was surprised to find that it was true. The man who organized his life to avoid any and all emotional risk had just walked into the center of a 5-alarm blaze and found that he didn't want to leave. We went back inside, a silent, unspoken agreement passing between us that we couldn't stay on that balcony forever. The walk back to our desks was the longest of my life. I was acutely aware of every curious glance, every whispered comment. But for the first time, it didn't matter. My focus was entirely on the woman walking beside me. We had crossed the line, and there was no going back. The rest of the afternoon was a blur of feigned productivity. I stared at spreadsheets, but the numbers swam before my eyes, rearranging themselves into the curve of her smile. I answered emails, but my fingers kept wanting to type her name. When 5 o'clock finally rolled around, I packed my bag with methodical slowness, my mind racing. What now? What did this mean? As I stood to leave, she was there, standing by my desk. She had her purse slung over her shoulder, her expression unreadable. "Walk me out?" she asked. It wasn't a question. We rode the elevator down in silence, the small space humming with unspoken energy. When we stepped out into the evening air, the city was alive with the rush of commuters heading home. So, I started, feeling like a teenager on a first date. I was thinking, "Let's go somewhere else," she interrupted, her voice firm. "Not my place. Not yours. Neutral ground." "Okay," I said, relieved that she was taking the lead. "Where?" She pointed across the street to a small, unassuming Italian restaurant wedged between a dry cleaner and a bookstore. "There. It looks quiet, and I'm starving." It was the perfect choice. The restaurant was dimly lit, filled with the smell of garlic and old wine. We were seated in a dark, secluded booth in the back, a small island in a sea of quiet chatter. For the first time since Julian's dramatic exit, We could finally breathe. We ordered pasta and wine. The simple act of choosing from a menu a welcome returned to normalcy. But nothing was normal anymore. "We need to talk about the Carmichael proposal," she said, her eyes fixed on the flickering candle between us. My heart sank. Right. The promotion, of course. That was still the reality. We were still competitors. "No, not the promotion," she said, looking up at me. "I mean what it represents. You and me, working together." She leaned forward, her voice dropping. "That proposal is the best thing either of us has ever produced, Alex. And it's because we did it together. Your meticulousness and my bulldozer approach," she smiled. "We make a ridiculously good team." "We do," I agreed, my heart starting to beat a little faster. "I've been thinking about it all day," she continued. "About the job, about what I want. For years, it's been about climbing the ladder, proving myself, proving people like Julian wrong." She took a sip of wine. "But that night at your apartment, and today in the office, I realized something. Winning doesn't mean much if you're doing it alone. And it means even less if you have to become someone you don't like to get there." She was laying her soul bare, and it was the most terrifying and beautiful thing I had ever witnessed. She was offering me a level of trust one had done nothing to earn, but everything to hope for. "What are you saying, Maya?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I'm saying," she said, reaching across the table and placing her hand over mine, "that I don't care about the promotion anymore. Not if it means competing against you. I'm going to withdraw my name from consideration tomorrow morning." I was stunned. "What? No, you can't. You've worked too hard for it. You deserve it." "Maybe," she conceded, "but I think I deserve this more." She squeezed my hand. "What we have, what we could have, it feels more important. It feels more real than any title." Sarah had wanted a grand adventure. She had seen my stability as a cage. Maya was looking at the same man, the same quiet deliberation, and seeing it not as a limitation, but as a foundation, a place to build something real. "Don't withdraw," I said, my mind racing, a plan forming, bold and terrifying. "Don't you dare, because I have a better idea." She raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "We go to Henderson. Together," I said, the idea taking shape as I spoke. "We present the Carmichael proposal as a joint project," which it was, "and we pitch him on a new role. A co-directorship. 2 heads are better than 1. Your strategic vision, my operational oversight. We show him that our partnership isn't just personal, it's a massive asset to the company." Her eyes widened, a slow smile spreading across her face. "You're insane," she breathed. "He'll never go for it. The company structure is rigid." "Maybe," I said, feeling a surge of confidence I hadn't felt in years. "But as you said, we make a ridiculously good team. Let's prove it." It was a gamble, a massive professional risk. But sitting there, looking at her, I knew it was the only move that made sense. It wasn't about him or her winning. It was about us building something new, together. The next morning, we walked into Mr. Henderson's office side by side. The presentation was flawless. We laid out the Carmichael proposal, highlighting how our combined skills had created a stronger outcome. Then, we made our pitch for the co-directorship. Henderson, a man who typically had the emotional range of a filing cabinet, leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers, his expression unreadable. He was silent for what felt like an eternity. I could feel Maya's nervous energy beside me. I reached down and found her hand under the table, giving it a reassuring squeeze. She squeezed back, a silent message of solidarity. "It's unorthodox," Henderson finally said, his voice a low rumble. "But this Carmichael proposal is the most innovative and financially sound projection I've seen in a decade." He looked from me to her, a flicker of something like respect in his eyes. "Draw up a formal proposal for the new role. I'll take it to the board. No promises. But I'm intrigued." We walked out of his office in a daze. We had done it. We had faced down the system and bent it to our will. In the hallway, Maya turned to me, her face glowing. "You were amazing," she said. "We were amazing," I corrected her. And right there, in the middle of the corporate hallway, under the unforgiving fluorescent lights, she kissed me again, a quick, joyful press of her lips that was a promise of everything to come. Our relationship unfolded in a series of small, significant moments. We started leaving things at each other's apartments. A toothbrush in my bathroom holder. A coffee mug with a witty slogan in her kitchen cabinet. I learned that her messy apartment was actually a creative haven, filled with half-read books on philosophy and art history, canvases leaning against the wall daubed with vibrant, abstract colors. She was a painter. It was a secret, vulnerable part of her she had shown to no one, and she showed it to me. I, in turn, let her into my quiet world. I showed her my collection of vintage maps, my fascination with the way cities grew and changed. She didn't call it boring. She called it fascinating. She traced the old rivers and forgotten roads with her finger and asked me a million questions, her curiosity a gift. We talked about our pasts, not to dwell, but to understand. I told her about Sarah, about the slow erosion of my confidence, the feeling of never being enough. She listened, her expression full of a fierce empathy that healed parts of me I didn't even know were broken. She told me more about Julian. Their relationship had been a whirlwind romance that slowly devolved into a cage of control. He had loved her ambition because it was a reflection on him, but he'd resented the independence that came with it. He tried to curate her life, her friends, even her thoughts. Her messy apartment, her secret painting, they were acts of rebellion, her way of carving out a space that was truly hers. My home, she told me one night, curled up next to me on my famously durable gray sofa. It stopped feeling like a home. It felt like his outpost. That's why I couldn't go back that night. It wasn't just the power outage. It was him. I felt like if I went back there, he'd somehow be there, waiting. "Don't send me home," I whispered, the memory of her dream words still vivid. She looked up at me, her eyes wide. "You heard that?" I nodded. "I've never forgotten it." "This," she said, her hand resting on my chest, right over my heart. "This feels like home." A year and a half flew by in a blur of shared victories and quiet moments. Henderson and the board, surprisingly, had approved our proposal. The co-directorship was a success, our complementary skills making our department the most efficient and innovative in the company. The professional rivalry had transformed into a seamless partnership that made us both better. Maya eventually sold her old apartment, the one that held the ghosts of Julian. We found a new place together, a loft with high ceilings and huge windows that let in the morning light. It had a wall of exposed brick that she loved and a small, quiet office where I could spread out my maps. We filled it with a chaotic mix of our lives. Her vibrant paintings and my orderly bookshelves, her collection of mismatched mugs, and my perfectly aligned remote controls. It wasn't beige. It wasn't messy. It was just us. We got a dog, a scruffy terrier mix from a local shelter whom we named Carmichael, Carmy for short. He was a creature of chaos and affection, and he filled our home with a new level of joyful energy. One Saturday night, a familiar storm rolled in, the kind with theatrical thunder and sheets of rain that blurred the city lights. The power flickered once, twice, then died completely, plunging our loft into darkness. For a second, an old, forgotten panic tightened in my chest. Then I felt Maya's hand find mine in the dark. "Well, this is familiar," she said, her voice calm and amused. I lit a few candles, their warm glow dancing across the room. Carmy curled up on the rug, unfazed. We sat on the couch, wrapped in a thick blanket, watching the lightning illuminate the sky. The couch was no longer a temporary refuge for a stranded rival. It was our shared throne, the center of our kingdom. She rested her head on my shoulder, her body relaxed and content against mine. There was no tension, no troubled dreams, just a deep, abiding peace. "You know," I said quietly, stroking her hair, "you never have to ask to stay again." She tilted her head up to look at me, her face illuminated by a flash of lightning. Her eyes were full of a love so profound it still sometimes stole my breath away. "Good," she whispered, her lips finding mine in the soft, flickering darkness. Because I'm never leaving. And in the quiet of the storm, surrounded by the life we had built, I knew that the greatest adventure wasn't about climbing mountains or diving into oceans. It was about finding the one person who saw you, truly saw you, and choosing to build a home with them, right in the heart of the storm. It was about turning on the lights together. Have you ever had a moment where someone saw a part of you that you thought was a flaw, and they called it strength? It's a powerful thing to be truly seen like that. It can change the entire way you see yourself. Tell me your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next.